So first, a little background on my own practice. I discovered dressage and Pilates about 20 years ago when I was living and riding and training in Colorado. I was very interested in both Pilates and dressage, and I was also practicing yoga and skiing a lot in the winter. So I was very interested in how all of these activities related to riding. With some encouragement from a friend who was also a Pilates teacher and a skier, I completed a Pilates teacher training program. I taught at two very different locations. One was a really large, busy health and rec center that had a lot of different classes, a big gym, hot springs. It was lovely. The other was a small private studio in Oregon that really focused on dance, yoga, and Pilates. I also taught private Pilates sessions. So at the risk of sounding like a Pilates infomercial, I do want to say that the most amazing thing that Pilates did for me was relieve neck pain that I had had for years. So as a young rider and colt starter from the time I was a teenager all the way up through my 20s to now, I had definitely gotten bucked off more than a few times as a kid, right? And I had had neck pain for years. However, I was surprised after your Pilates that my neck pain was gone, and I think it's because it targets the very small muscles that surround the spine and hold together like the multifidi. Also, as another side note, when I moved to just riding classical dressage and I learned how to start young horses with the classical method, I don't get bucked off nearly as much as I did when I was trying to be a cowgirl. So when I first started practicing Pilates, I knew right away that I wanted to find a way for it to connect it to dressage, but it took me a long time to sort through what really applies to riding and what doesn't, beyond the simple fact that Pilates can make you stronger and more flexible and coordinated and improve core strength. So I've winnowed down the possibilities to 3 essential concepts and a handful of exercises that I feel confident will help your riding that I'm going to present you with tonight. So the concepts are shoulder girdle stabilization, engaging the upper back and chest muscles to keep the spine strong and straight. The next one is pelvic stabilization, so not scooping, twisting, or collapsing unilaterally when the forces of physics act upon the rider or when we're trying to influence the horse. The next concept is the ability to hold the core firmly while moving the arms and legs as needed, that we don't lose the core engagement when we're making a gesture or making an aid to the horse, and that's what a lot of people struggle with. Lastly, Pilates can teach us how to be aware of opposing muscle groups engaging to make the core strong and stabilize the spine in good riding position. For example, the rider's back is as important as the rider's abdominals. Okay, so I'll just take a moment. I'll go a little more deeply into each concept, and then what we're going to do this evening is that I will demonstrate the exercises that we're going to do so you can watch and we can discuss the concepts. Then we'll all do them together, and then we have a couple sort of inspiring videos to watch at the end of the night.
And then we have medication.
And then we have medication. Then there's wine and chocolate and yes, all the rewards. So the strength of the human body comes from opposing muscle groups. This means that we have to activate the whole ring of muscles that go around the upper back, the sides of the ribs, and the chest. So we have our lats in the back that help pull the shoulders down and back along with the rhomboids. In the front we have the pecs, and then we also have the lats and the pecs and the intercostal muscles helping to pull the sides down here. So one of the cues that I give people a lot is to sort of press their underarms down as they're lifting up their chest, and that helps kind of engage that whole ring of muscles. How do we keep the shoulder girdle stable in a way that allows us to be tall and utilize the full length of our spine without fanning the rib cage open? So I'm going to grab my trusty broom there. I did have a very elegant looking stick, but I forgot it. so we're going to put this behind the rider's back.
This is what we would have, so this is
fine. And you'll see that my back is flat. Okay, so I'm not here when I put this behind my neck. I'm not poking my neck out. I'm not collapsing the spine. So I'm using this to create a flat space. Now, it's not down here in the middle of my back, right? And it's also not up here on my neck. So it's really just across the back of the shoulders. So I have this really nice stretch here across my pectoral muscles. So if I say, okay, now rider, go ahead and lift up your chest and broaden your chest for me. And they stretch up and they fan the rib cage open, right? So we have what are called the intercostal muscles between the ribs, and we can expand them like an umbrella, but that makes us kind of overly stretch the abs out and we disconnect the top and the bottom of our body, right? So instead of kind of lifting up and expanding the ribs like a dancer, when we engage the shoulder girdle, we want to actually press the ribs down together, like you're closing the umbrella or you're knitting the front of the ribs together. So if we're doing this exercise here and we're pressing the underarms down and lifting up the chest, we don't want to go to here and arch the back and fan the ribs out, because that would be a very weak riding position, right? If we were trying to push with our hips, we'd fall forward. So when we're stabilizing the shoulder girdle, we are also drawing the ribs down and together like this, and that also helps us engage the obliques and the front abdominals to keep kind of pull everything together here. So it's actually, if you flip your hand out over, you'll see that there's an illustration there, and the transverse abdominis goes around the lower half of the trunk, kind of like a girdle, and it's a very deep muscle, and attaches, of course, near your spine, in the back, and then to something called the aponeurosis thing in the front. So what this does is, if you really tighten it, you'll feel kind of your waist tighten all the way around. It kind of compresses everything in. So if you just want to sit up a little bit and put your hands on your tummy, like your fingers down by your pubic bone and the heels of your hands on your ribs, and if you go, you'll feel that muscle dump right down here. Okay,
Right, yeah.
so that's your transverse abdominis, okay? We're going to be talking about that a lot. And Pilates really emphasizes this for its ability to draw the core in and tighten everything. The pelvis is by nature a large bony structure, and so it's much more stable than the shoulder girdle. But when we add the dynamic forces of horseback riding, the waist can give way in 4 different directions, right? And it can cause the pelvis to rock. So we can recruit the transverse abdominis to hold the pelvis more stable. So I always say that, when you're riding, you should treat your pelvis like a bucket of water. Don't spill it forward, don't spill it backward, try not to spill it side to side. You'll hear people talk a lot about the psoas and the iliopsoas in riding, because it stabilizes the lower back when it's tighter. So even though it's a very, very deep core muscle that's on the inside of your body, it's on the front of your spine, people talk a lot about the psoas, and including for the horse as well, because the psoas can also help to flex the pelvis, which in the horse is very important. Like when they're cantering, we want that dolphin-like activity, right? When they're bringing their actual hips under. So the horse's psoas and iliopsoas are very important as well. For us, we want to use it in sort of an isometric contraction. We don't want to go too far to this position on riding, because you'll strain your lower back. Riding, where do you need to be stiff and where do you need to be flexible? Can you isolate one part of the body to be stable while being flexible in another place? Sometimes I'll have my riders, when I'm doing my seat lessons on the lunge, I'll challenge their core to be really, really firm, and then I'll say, okay, now make circles with your hands. Just make circles and see if you can hold your abs and just make circles at the same time. It seems really simple, but you'll notice it's hard to hold the core at the same time. And the trunk needs to be very stable, but the hips need to move. And when I say hips, I mean your literal ball and socket joints. So we're going to talk a little bit about bony landmarks tonight, and one of the things that I want to share with you, and you may know this already, is that your ball and socket joint is about the same level as your pubic bone. So if you're trying to think, I need to use my hips when I ride, well, it's not up here, it's not your iliac crest that you're using your hips, it's down low. And so that can help you think like, okay, your seat bones are actually lower than your pubic bone, and they're lower than your ball and socket joint. But so it can help just to know that your pubic bone and ball and socket joints are about level. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're talking about using the hips and not letting the core go. It's because the core has to help hold the pelvis stable, and then the hip joints move. So if you're watching me move here, my core is not moving. It's my actual hip joints. If my core was moving, you would see this.
Right.
Right? That's the core moving. Now I'm going to hold my core really still. Now it's just hip joints. That's the only thing that's moving. There's no waist joint, right? This spine line is not changing. Okay. So in riding, we never relax our core. Which everyone's like, oh darn. And that is because when we relax our core, we lose all influence over the horse. And in dressage, we don't have a following seat. We have a directive seat that speaks to the horse all the time and tells the horse what we'd like. So it's a directing seat, not a following seat. We always say it's like the conductor conducting the orchestra, right? The musicians follow his beat. Students tell me that they're concerned about being stiff in the saddle, right? Whenever we're like beginning in I'm like, all right, you gotta hold your core, you can't let it go. They're like, well, what if I feel stiff? So I always say that the first thing that the rider has to do is get control over their body. You can't direct the horse with the tools of your body if the body is moving chaotically or is loose, or the rider collapses in kind of a defensive mechanism to absorb the bounce of the trot or the bounce of the canter. So riding is about steadiness in most places and flexibility in just a few places. But flexibility also means control. Flexibility is never loose. So that's another thing that I like about the focus of Pilates and of yoga, is that it's about controlled suppleness and flexibility in